today, and we're going to try to resolve. We're going to try to resolve human nature today. All right?
Yeah.
You think we can do this in 25 minutes? Let's see if we can resolve human nature in 25 minutes. Good morning, everybody. We're on page 282 approximately. No, I'll tell you what. I'm going a little bit backwards because we have an analysis. We got to do a little scuba diving today, so we're gonna have to go a little backward in order to go forward. You know, there's two styles of Talmud study. You can study at high speed, or you can study at depth, and it's a choice, broad or deeper. And you know, just today, I think we should go a little bit deeper here on page 282. I want to just give you the bird's eye view as to, you want a Talmud? Right behind me, okay? A bird's eye view as to where we're holding it. We're talking about a day. Here, there's a chair right here. Toby right here. There's a chair over there. Dan.
There's chairs.
Oh, we almost have a million for talk.
Okay. So the discussion goes like this, folks. There was in Babylon, in ancient Babylon, which is Iraq, there was a dispute inside of the academy, of the yeshiva of the Talmudic Academy. Rabbi Gamliel was removed from his post. I'm not going to get into the details of why, but on the day that he was replaced with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the man whom we mention in the Haggadah, we mentioned Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Haggadah, the day that he was removed from his post, a dramatic change took place in the yeshiva where they began to allow everybody into the yeshiva, whoever wanted to. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what kind of person they were. Why? Because the policy in the yeshiva before, and this is the Talmudic Academy. Remember what the Talmudic Academy is. It's very related to this week's Torah portion. That the way that God writes the Torah is different to any book. This is an unbelievable work. The work of Torah is godly wisdom that is sent to us in a way which it's like a slow release pill is maybe a good analogy. You know what a slow release pill is? You know, there's a big fast coming up, and there's actually a pill you can take. You know, in the kosher stores they sell this pill. It's like I think they call it like a pill that allows you to fast easier because it kind of releases enzymes or whatever, hormones, whatever stuff you need throughout the 24 hours. That's like a slow release, right? So if you have a hard time fasting, you can consider taking this pill. When you have a slow release pill, it's like that God gives us the Torah, but it's a gift that keeps on giving because it keeps on releasing new versions or new components of the wisdom along the way. How does that happen? Through our involvement with the Torah. So when we sit around this table and this virtual table right now, we could quite possibly come up with a novelty that's never been considered before. It's quite possible we're about to do that. I have a feeling we might. And if we do that, then we will unpeel a new component of Torah that was never yet revealed before. The Gemara has been written for 2,000 years, right? The Torah was given on Mount Sinai 3,300 something years ago. Yet it took until 2024 for this component to be revealed. And this is the chidush, the novelty that we will be uncovering. Right, so so I just want you to be aware of how the Torah works. And remember, we spoke about this earlier this week that the fifth book of the Torah, which we begin this week, is called the Mishnah Torah. It's called the subsidiary of Torah, because the first four books were given by God directly, that dictated to Moses. The fifth book was spoken by Moses, God speaking through his throat. Subsequent Torah was given through Moses' mind and through the minds of the sages, right? So we therefore are actually a part of the revelation of Torah, a part of the almost the authorship of Torah, which is why Tanya chapter 5 tells us something profound, that there's nothing more, no more profound of an intimate divine experience. There's nothing more profound of an intimate divine experience than studying Torah. Because when you're studying Torah, your mind and God's wisdom are inseparably united, indifferentiable. You're not able to differentiate between your wisdom and God's idea. In your mind, you can't demarcate the lines, right? And therefore, when we study Torah, we are becoming one with God. This is the reason why Mordechai, in the story of Purim, when the Jewish people were facing annihilation, sounds familiar? When the Jewish people were facing annihilation, what does he do? He gathers 22,000 Jewish children and he teaches them Torah. Because the Torah study is the greatest defense. It is the divine shield of Jewish people. What we are doing right now is studying Torah. We are shielding our nation with an iron dome, with a S-400 shield protection system that protects us much greater than the S-400. It's divine protection, protecting us from harm. Now, let's go back into the story. So what happened here? The students of the the policy in the academy with the previous leader of the academy was such that only, I'm going to quote exactly bottom of page 282. A brisa taught that day in which Rebbe ben Azariah became Nasi. They moved the doorkeeper from the entrance to the base medrash. They removed the bouncer, and permission was granted for all students to enter, because Rabbi Gamliel, during that period, the period he was Nasi, the previous, he would proclaim and say, any student whose interior is not like his exterior may not enter the house of study. Whichever student whose inside does match his outside may not enter the house of study. That is, anyone who studies Torah but does not possess fear of heaven. If his inside doesn't match his outside, right? That was the policy. But now they removed the doorman and everybody was allowed in. Now, what that implies, according to Rabbi Gamliel's policy, the very words interior doesn't match his exterior means that he's spiritually rotten, and that it implies that his outside is more important than his inside, that the interior follows the exterior. It implies the principle of fake it until you make it. That's what it implies, that the way you act on the outside is the way you should become on the inside. But yet the inside wasn't following the outside. Okay, that's what was going on over here. Now, he was ousted.
Inauthentic.
He was inauthentic. Very good. Now, comes the Gemara continues on the next page, 283. When Rebbe ben Azariah became Nasi, he removed the guard from the door and allowed anyone who wished to enter to study Torah. Now, that day, many benches were added to the base medrash to accommodate the large increase in students. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yosef and Bardestoy and the rabbis disagree about the matter. One says 400 benches were added, another one says 700 benches were added. They must have had a new chairman, Rob, to be able to put the seats in order, right? Rabbi Gamliel became disheartened. So the previous leader of the academy became disheartened. When he saw so many students studying, he said to himself, perhaps, God forbid, I have withheld Torah from Israel. You know, to be a rabbi, you need to be extremely sensitive to the fact that you might be the problem. You have to be extremely sensitive to the fact that you might actually be the one blocking the relationship of your parishioners connecting to Hashem, right? Mm-hmm. If you, for example, somebody came into my office recently and said to me that his father was a rabbi, and his father, this guy was clearly like uncomfortable with his faith. His father was a rabbi, and I'm talking to him, and eventually he reveals to me that his father would often tell them at home that he doesn't believe in God. His father would often tell the kids that he doesn't believe in God. Now, he wasn't exactly an Orthodox rabbi, let's be clear, okay? But that's what he said. And this kid's faith was like shattered. Till this day, the guy's like in his 60s. His faith is shattered because his father, the rabbi, was like a hypocrite. Yeah, he was a hypocrite. So, he kind of was basically saying, look, I'm doing this as a showman as opposed to sincerity, right? As authenticity. So the rabbi is perfectly in a position to be able to lead the people astray without them even realizing it. He could be the problem instead of the solution. It's very, very important for rabbis to be cognizant of this all the time. Maybe I was wrong, he says, in not allowing these people to come to study, and I'll be punished for this. Now, what's about to happen? He has a dream, and in this dream, it's unclear what the message they were telling him. So let's just take a look at the dream. We did learn this last week. We're just doing a little more in detail. So they in heaven, they showed him, turning to 284, in a dream, white pitchers filled with ashes. So a pitcher is like a jug. They showed him white jugs filled with ashes. Now, what color are ashes?
White or gray.
White or gray. Now, they're not red. We said that, right?
No.
Those
are embers.
Embers. Ashes are white. Okay, so it's filled with ashes. Now, ashes are dead. There's no life in ashes, right? As if to say, now this is now the commentary of the art scroll on the dream. This is the commentary of the article. Very important to differentiate the original from the commentary. As if to say that Rabbi Gamliel had acted correctly by not allowing the new students in, because just as the pitches are white on the outside, yet inside are full of worthless ashes, so the new students appear worthy on the outside, but inside are not really sincere. So it seems like the messaging here was, at least according to the interpretation of the article, that indeed, these guys were, maybe on the outside they looked white, but on the inside they were worthless, they were useless, they were bad. That's what the art scroll is saying is the meaning, the interpretation of this dream. So let's just stop for a second. According to this, that heaven, they're telling him that he was right. In heaven, they were telling him that he was right. The Gemara comments, but it is really not really so. I.e., this was not really a heavenly sign that Rabbi Gamliel had been correct. In other words, the Gemara disagrees that this is all commentary, but it is not so. Can't just read, it is not so. Rather, they showed Rabbi Gamliel this dream from heaven only to put his mind at ease. In other words, only to make him feel better, but not really that he was right. Since he had been motivated by pure intentions when he instituted this policy, in truth, however, he was not correct in preventing all these people. He was not correct in preventing all these people from coming to study. So now, the reason why this particular Talmud is so important to me is because I believe that this piece of Talmud represents the spiritual journey of our generation. When the Rebbe came to America in 1940, the Rebbe delivered a discourse on the date of that arrival. It was years later, but it was dated on the date of his arrival, the 28th of Sivan. And when the Rebbe gave a discourse, it was titled, I guess it was Vayishlach Yeshua, about the spies of Joshua, talking about the spies of Moses, without getting into it. There, the Rebbe says in that discourse that the spiritual purpose, the spiritual journey of our generation, we're more shallow than our predecessors. Let's be honest. We're less sincere, less authentic. They might have been, Torah sages, studying Torah day and night, living in the shtetl, worrying less about international interest rates and international business relations, and a little bit more focused, a lot more focused on Torah and mitzvahs, right? Yet we are much more entrenched in the secular world. And the message that the Rebbe gave to the Jewish people, the American Jews, was that we need to focus on our clothing. What's our clothing? Clothing of our body, we know what that is. But what's the clothing of our soul? You know what the clothing of our soul is? 3 things.
Head, heart, and
no, clothing of our soul. How do we manifest? How do we...
Thought, speech, and action.
Exactly. Thought, speech, and action. When you think, when you speak, and when you act. I had a whole discussion with somebody yesterday. We know what we do. We know what we say. But how much in control are you of your thoughts? Think about that for a moment. First thought. Okay, fine. Let's say first thought pops into your head, you don't control. But how much in control are you of your thoughts? How much in control? You think about it, you have to answer me. But just think about that for a moment. When you think, when a thought pops into your mind that is unhealthy, what do you do with it?
You ameliorate it with the second time. You analyze it.
Chassidus teaches us that you can only think one thought at a time. Chassidus teaches us that, right? So therefore, if you don't like the CD that's in you, remember the olden days you used to have CDs? Remember those days? You still have that? A dinosaur? Okay. So if you had a CD that you didn't like, what did you do? You take it out and put a new one. Yeah. Thoughts are like CDs. Thoughts are like CDs. You don't like the thought you have right now on play, then take it out and put another one in. And you can only think about one thought at a time. You cannot think about 2 thoughts at the same time. So if you're thinking a depressing thought or a frightening thought right now, if you're thinking about, what's going to be with Israel? They hate us. Anti-Semitism. If you're being stressed out to your eyeballs, then you know what you do? Just push that thought out and replace it with a positive thought. Think about a good thing.
What?
Think about something that makes you happy. Think about a faith-filled thought. And when you do that, you'll be changing the way you think and changing the way you feel. Now, in this discourse, the Rebbe said that our emphasis as American Jews needs to be on our thought, speech, and action, on our garments, on our superficiality. Because if we can master our thought, speech, and action, can you imagine being in control of every word that comes out of your mouth? I can imagine. Why not? Just don't say stupid things. Just think before you speak. It is actually possible to do that, by the way. It is. It is possible to think before you speak. There's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you speak. You're not supposed to say every thought that comes to your mind. You're actually not supposed to do that. Just because you think of something, it doesn't mean that it has to be shared. And just because you think something, it doesn't mean you have to dwell on it. You are the master of your own castle. You don't have to allow in any vagrant or any hoodlum that knocked on your door. Just because it knocked on your door, it doesn't mean it needs to be granted access. You can say, nope, say keep on going, no access allowed, right? Fine. So the Rebbe said, when you focus and you control your thought, speech, and action, then you will actually transform your interior as well. Right? Since the Rebbe told us this is the spiritual purpose of our generation, I'm now applying this principle, superimposing it on this piece of Talmud, right? And I'm trying to understand whether the behavior of Rabbi Gamliel was right or wrong. Rabbi Gamliel says that every student who's inside doesn't match his outside is denied access. I think that what's happening over here, correct me if you disagree, but I think that what's happening over here is that Rabbi Gamliel did not agree with what the Rebbe is saying. I believe that the Rebbe was blazing a trail, a new trail that, just like, we've learned in the Gates of Trust. Let's talk about this, okay? I believe that the Rebbe was a maverick. The Rebbe is a maverick. I'm going to give you at least 3 examples of how the Rebbe changed spiritual pathways, or opened up new spiritual pathways for our generation that didn't previously exist. We together have learned the Gates of Trust. We've learned tracht gut wird sein gut, that when you think good, it will be good. We've learned this idea at great length. And if you haven't learned it with me, I encourage you to study it with me. Go to jewishgardens.com/trust. That's jewishgardens.com/trust. It will change your life if you go through the gates of trust, which is what Jews have used since time immemorial in order to transform bad circumstances into good. So there the Rebbe explains that when we think positive thoughts, when we think thoughts filled with trust in God, they will change our circumstance. Now, our biblical predecessors did not do this. What happened when Moses hears that he's about to be slandered to Pharaoh? What happens? It says that he was fearful, and then Pharaoh heard, and then he runs away. Which means Moses did not engage this concept of blind trust in God, which would have given him a positive outcome. Instead, he exhibits fear. The result is actualized. The fear is actualized, and he has to run away for 60 years of his life. From the age of 20 to 80, we don't know anything about Moses' life, almost nothing about his life. The prime years of Moses' life we know about are from 80 to 120. But from 20 to 80, it's like invisible, because he did not exercise the doctrine of blind trust. Jacob did the same thing. When Jacob sees the enemy, he saw his nemesis coming, marching towards him with 400 mercenaries armed to the teeth. It says he's afraid. Now, Jacob had a different outcome, but still he was afraid. He didn't exhibit. The Rebbe taught us that fear is our enemy, right? I believe that what the Rebbe was doing, he was blazing a new pathway to say that if you take this path, you will succeed. The Rebbe was opening a new door that didn't previously exist. Now, it was rooted in the Gates of Trust, in the writings of Ibn Pekuda, right? But Rabbeinu B'chaye, right? Nevertheless, I believe that the Rebbe was opening a new pathway as the spiritual leader, as the shepherd of our generation. Were you going to say something?
Well, in Moses' time, they did not know God. They forgot about him. So Moses needed to go out into the wilderness and then find. I hate to use the word find God, but he did.
Moses' burning bush experience was at the age of 80. Yeah. Moses' experience with God, let me think for a second. Did Moses have a religious experience at birth? That's a very interesting observation that you're making, that Moses himself didn't have an intimate relationship with God. His father was the Rebbe of the generation. They were living in a spiritually depressed and physically oppressed time. So that's an interesting observation that you're making over there. I kind of like it. I think in general, the Jewish nation was in diapers relative to now, when we have all this history behind us. And we can fall back in history and say, wow, well, look at the miracles. I mean, to be an atheist today, you got to be an idiot. Forgive me for saying that, but I'm very serious. To be an atheist today, you've got to be an absolute imbecile. And I'll tell you why. Because to think that the Jewish people have outlived every other malicious enemy over 3,000 years, and that's just random, you got to be a fool. The Torah prophesied that the Jews will outlive their enemies multiple times, and that's exactly the case. And you come back, you come back Monday morning quarterback, and you say, actually, that was by chance. It's like Babe Ruth, pointing to the outfield in that famous game and saying there, and then the ball goes there, and then you say, yeah, that was coincidence, right? It's exactly what it's like, but you got 3,000 years of history here, right? So today, somebody who's an atheist, I believe, is just a fool. He's just ignoring history. It's like being a Palestinian today. It's like saying that history doesn't matter, right? The fact that the Jewish people are occupying the land of Israel, just let that sink in for a second. The Jewish people are occupying the biblical land of Israel. It's like saying, I am occupying my deeded house. It's absurd. It's like a total ignoring of history, right? And I'm not sure how I got at that point, but anyways, nice thing you said over there is that history shows us we've got a lot to fall back on, whereas in those days they didn't have what to fall back on in the days of Moses. A second example of how the Rebbe blazed the trail. A second example. So we often have learned many times, and many of you of us have been indoctrinated with this idea that God punishes us. God punishes us for our indiscretions. Yet I believe, and this is an emerging idea which I'm working on, is that the Rebbe teaches us in many places that God doesn't actually punish us. We learned in the previous Rebbe's writings that God punishes us. That's the Rebbe's predecessor. Yet the Rebbe himself writes that God doesn't punish us. But yeah, God doesn't punish us. This is an emerging idea, so forgive me if it's not entirely complete. It's a novelty that I'm working on. But I believe that I have enough support right now to be able to say that the Rebbe talks about consequence instead of punishment. When Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, God didn't just whack them over the head with mortality. You're going to die because you ate my fruit. But that, the Rebbe explains, they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What's the tree of knowledge of good and evil? They now have evil ingested within them. They have evil ingested within them. They now have evil intimately connected with them. If they're going to live forever, guess what's going to happen? Then evil will live forever. Therefore, you must now experience mortality so that evil will not live forever. And once you are able to transform evil into light, evil into good, darkness into light, once you're able to look at a bad event and see it as a good event, can you imagine? I was talking to somebody late last night, and this person was going through a terrible crisis. And I said to them, all of Jewish history has taught us that the bad things that happen to us are like a plowed field. Superficially, the plowing of a field looks like the destruction of the field. But a wise person understands that the deeper the plow, the greater the subsequent growth. So if you can take your current struggle and see it as part of a greater trajectory of growth, you will have transformed your fear into faith, your negativity into positivity, your darkness into light. And when we can reach that state of consciousness, we will have ejected evil from within our consciousness. We will have reversed the consequence of the ingested fruit, the forbidden fruit, and we will no longer need to grapple with mortality. We will then be able to experience immortality with the coming of Mashiach. So again, it's not a punishment. What kind of parent says, you ate that apple, I'm going to kill you? What kind of parents would speak like this? Yet God says this in the Torah. I understand why people could be Bible critics. I can understand why a superficial read of the Bible could be, who could believe this stuff, right? A superficial reading of the Bible. Again, nothing to do with history, but just reading the Bible could be uninspiring. You have to learn the Bible with depth. Otherwise, it's a pathetic read. It's a novelty of the Rebbe to say that it's not a punishment, it's a consequence. And every bad thing that happens to you is part of what, I'm going to put it this way. Bad things don't happen to you. They happen for you. I want you to think about that. This, I believe, is a novelty that the Rebbe teaches us. Bad things don't happen to you. They happen for you. Now, a third concept which the Rebbe trailblazed, I believe, is this idea, which the Talmud here is grappling with. And it's the Rebbe of our generation that actually, what's the word? The Rebbe that actually solidified it as a divine spiritual pathway. So in the days of the Talmud, the Rabbi Gamliel said, if your inside doesn't match your outside, then you don't belong here. And at that time, fake it until you make it was not an ideal to aspire towards. It was not an ideal to aspire towards. You wanted to be a better person. You had to work on great, intense inner work. But it was then he's sort of struggling. Did he do the right thing or the wrong thing? And the Talmud says that God gave him a dream. So God gives him a dream. The white pitch is filled with ashes. What is white pitch is filled with ashes? So you could say maybe it's a negative. To say, fine, the outside is good, is white, but the inside is just toxic ash, right? And then the Talmud says, no. That was only to make him feel better. They did this only to make him feel better. But really, he was wrong. But really, he was wrong. Really, he was wrong. And I think that the Talmud leaves this hanging as an enigma. Leaves it deliberately hanging as an enigma. So we're left with 1 second. Was this dream telling us that you need to focus on the inside? That white ash is more important than the white pitcher? Or was that just a consolation prize when in reality he was wrong and he should have allowed the students in? The Talmud leaves it hanging. I believe it's the Rebbe that brought it home. I believe it was the Rebbe that basically says in that discourse which he delivered on the day of his arrival into America to say, folks, our generation is spiritually, I'm not going to say the word rotten, but spiritually Swiss cheese. Okay? We're a little aged. We're a little Swiss cheese. On the inside, we might not be the most, the most authentic. But what the Rebbe is telling us is focus on your external. Focus on your superficial, and you will attain great spiritual heights. What that means is, friends, is like this on a very practical level. It means that you're not ready. You don't really understand what tefillin is. It means that you don't really relate to it. Your father didn't relate to tefillin. You don't ever remember seeing your grandfather laying tefillin.
I understand 30% of my prayers.
I understand 30% of my prayers, and that's pretty high, right? So why should I pray? Comes to Rebbe and he says, listen, do it anyways. Because the act of showing up and reading the prayers as much as you can will actually transform you from the inside out. Your white ashes will be turned into burning embers. Is it possible, by the way, for ashes ever to... is there any danger to generate? Is there a danger? If you have ashes, can they ever combust?
No, not unless there's ember.
Fertilizes the ground.
Not unless there's ember.
Okay.
Rabbi, it fertilizes the ground. And if you read footnote number 12, how then could the new students participate have resulted in such unprecedented clarity? The answer is the rabbi says in Machas 12 about himself that he learned more from his students than he did from his teachers, which Rashi there explains to be because the students ask questions, which in turn forces the teachers to formulate precise answers, which in turn gives the teacher greater clarity. Here as well, therefore, the involvement of the many students brought greater clarity to the teachers. The teachers were then able to rule in all the issues that had until then remained unresolved. So it's all these ashes that are in there that are fertilized.
Okay, fine. So I think that's the novelty. I think that exactly is the novelty. We as normal people think that ashes are negative. There's no positive use to ashes. Ashes are worthless. Yet, it's being discovered in this group that ashes actually have nitrogen. That ashes actually serve as fertilizer. They will accelerate the growth of your crop or whatever. Right. What that means is that what's a fertilizer? Fertilizer is schmutz. What is fertilizer? Fertilizer is, I don't want to say it, but it's garbage. Fertilizer is garbage that you've discovered for it a useful purpose. It's waste. Fertilizer is waste, which has become, which has discovered a subsequent positive purpose.
Well, it's breaking down into its original parts.
And I think that there's a message here.
It's creating its original essence,
Right. So I think,
which helps grow things.
okay. So I think that the message here might be, and we can conclude with this idea, that maybe by showing him the white pitchers filled with white ashes, the message was like this. It was a slow release idea. That 2,000 years ago, white ashes, useless. White ashes are useless, but it's being discovered in subsequent generations that ashes actually serve an incredibly useful purpose. They can provide food for in times of famine. They can make things grow. In other words, we've discovered that what used to be a negative has actually become a positive. Whereas the person who's a faker who outside is good but inside is rotten. You would have thought that a faker is a bad thing. In subsequent generations, in recent times, we've discovered that that's actually a fine spiritual path. Certainly for us superficial American Jews living in the 21st century. And I think that might be the closing idea here. That just as fertilizer is a smelly thing, stinky and smelly, right, can be turned into $1 billion enterprise. I know of a businessman down in Australia who sold $1 billion worth of garbage to the country of India, right? He made $1 billion out of waste, right? It's amazing, right? So he's an alchemist. He's discovered how to make gold out of garbage, right? That's the same thing over here. Being a faker is not an ideal that any one of us would want to have aspired for, certainly not in the times of the Talmud when people were spiritually astute. But now, when we've discovered greater depth about ourselves, about the world, about humanity, when the Rebbe has opened this door for us to be able to discover a new spiritual path, now we say, 1 second, it's ashes in there? Very good. Ashes inside of the white pitchers. On the outside of the white pitchers, maybe the reason why the ashes became useful is because on the outside it was white. And if on the outside you're white, then ultimately we're going to discover a very powerful and useful purpose for the ashes on the inside as well. Bottom line is, friends, is fake it until you make it. I think Rabbi Gamliel was wrong in not allowing the students that were inauthentic into the academy. Maybe for that time it was okay. For that time it was okay. But the dream was portraying a time in the future, a time in the distant future where we will realize the error of those ways, where a new spiritual path will be blazed for a new, more superficial generation that is not as authentic as the generation of Rabbi Gamliel. And in that time in the future, we will then cherish and value the power of faking it until you're making it, of emphasizing the garments on the outside, the thought, speech, and action, so that the inside will very soon follow suit.
So, Rabbi, the Rebbe's 3 messages were: fear is our enemy, bad things happen for you, and active showing up transforms you. Are those the 3 messages that I got?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
At that time, they were very judgmental, right?
I don't know. I think you're being judgmental.
Well, no, he's being judgmental by saying they're not good enough.
Yeah. Fair enough.
He's making his judgment. Right?
Yeah, he is certainly making a judgment.
They're lesser worthy
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So today,
Are we judgmental today? We're not judgmental? Oh, you saying Chabad is not judgmental? That's interesting.
Chabad movement isn't that one of the foundations?
You know, it's very sad observation, Chuck, that you're saying that. Yeah, at least in the Chabad movement, our philosophy is like this. Our philosophy is that if you think you're an atheist, but if a person thinks he's an atheist, or a person thinks that he's not a good Jew, then let me introduce you to you. Then you haven't reached your own depth, right? Because if you dig deep enough, you'll find a very sincere, a very beautiful diamond within you. And if you think that you're not that, then we want to introduce you to a better version of yourself.
Yeah, we're non-judgmental.
Yeah, non-judgmental. I think it's a very nice observation. Rob, you gonna say something? No heckling today? And you, Dan, you gonna say something?
I have a question.
A question.
Okay,
fine.
Directly relate to that.
Okay, waste is a better way to put it. All right, guys. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining me here online in this beautiful idea that spans 2,000 years. Love it. Shkach.
Thank you very much.